Will, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Pete. How you doing?
Awesome, man. Yeah, just enjoying the day. Happy 3% off all time highs. Appreciate you joining. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. I'll take it any day. And is this the inaugural BT Net Spaces?
Yes, sir. This is the first Bitcoin Treasuries Spaces. So I appreciate you helping us beta test it as we go live. Thanks to everybody who's joining in. Uh, you know, uh, like to lead off with just a quick reminder: Bitcoin Treasuries. Feel free to head over there for all your Bitcoin Treasury information needs. A couple product announcements that we just launched this week. Got a new newsletter out coming out Mondays and Fridays. Mondays is a big list of the top Bitcoin Treasuries buys of the week. Friday is more of a deep dive analysis. So if you haven't subscribe to that. Check that out. Also launched a new business directory on the site. So if you head over to the homepage, in addition to the leaderboard, if you kind of scroll up towards the top, you'll see a little widget there that says directory. You can look at some businesses there that are servicing Bitcoin treasury companies if that's what you're into. And of course, trying to make the website as good as we can for this emerging sector. So appreciate all the product feedback. Feel free to DM me or otherwise email me, pete@bitcointreasuries.net. So with that, Will, welcome to the program. And yeah, excited to chat everything that you're up to at Fold.
Absolutely. And happy to be a part of the maiden voyage here. Exciting times. And this is, I always love shipping a new product out into the world and get feedback. So hopefully we can drum up some stuff for you, good ideas from the audience.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, I definitely wanted to chat about your transition to being a public company. Obviously, I've been a Fold user for a long time. I've been spinning the wheel since 2020, 2021. So I'd love to maybe just high level, what's it like to be that journey, and what's it like running a public company now?
Well, I have to say, I think so. Fold officially started in 2019, but we have been around building since 2015, 2016, and I have to say, becoming a public company was really nowhere in the kind of vision in those early days. I think it's a kind of a testament to how much the world has bent towards Bitcoin that we even find ourselves here. So it's been a hell of a journey, one that I wouldn't even have, couldn't have imagined maybe even 18, 24 months ago. But here we are. And, personally, I've been learning quite a bit. And, we have certainly, I think now we're about 6 months into our listing. So we've got our sea legs, we're setting the table, and we're excited for all the new things that we're able to do as a public company serving Bitcoiners.
Well, let's talk about the treasury component of it. And so I guess I have a question. In terms of how you were thinking about the business, the idea that a company would own Bitcoin, keep it on the balance sheet, has been an idea for a while. Now it's sort of come with this expectation that the company is sort of growing the Bitcoin balance on behalf of potentially the shareholders and investors and things like that. So just curious for your thoughts on, how did the way you think about growing your Bitcoin balance, like how has that changed and what was it like? Because obviously you were holding Bitcoin as a startup, right? And now you sort of have this idea where you're publicly reporting on this balance, and it's sort of a kind of key metric that people are looking at and observing and analyzing. And so I'm just wondering like how that process has been.
Yeah, I think our Bitcoin treasury has very humble beginnings, and it's just aligned with the very fact of why I'm in Bitcoin, why Fold exists to help others accumulate Bitcoin, because we think it's just a fundamentally better way to store value and the fruits of your labor. And so for Fold, it always just made sense of when we had extra cash, where would it go? It was an obvious decision of Bitcoin. And I know that there's thousands and thousands of small businesses and that have made the same choice, not public companies, not, running a sailor playbook, but just humbly stacking sats because that's aligned with their beliefs. And so for Fold, that's always where it started. But because we've been around for a few cycles, we've been able to see how truly transformative it is. So Fold today has more value in our Bitcoin treasury than all of the money we raised as a private company. So that is just something that doesn't really exist, and it's a thing that most fiat based companies are. That is just quite the opposite. They have some of them have raised more money than their market cap. And so it's a completely different paradigm when you're saving in Bitcoin. So for us, it started very humble beginnings. Let's just be aligned with our customers. And holy shit, a few cycles have gone by. This is far more powerful than we even expected. And so, we look at listing in public markets, and I look at our Bitcoin treasury as almost this ballast that allows us to make that decision. Whereas a small cap company jumping into public markets, I'd be frankly really worried. But because Fold is sitting on this treasury, it didn't really worry us at all. In fact, it allows us to move forward with supreme confidence. And I think that's just what it does at every level, whether you're just running your own business or you're running a public company. Bitcoin treasuries seem to do that.
I'm taking a look at the leaderboard right now. You guys are 31 on the leaderboard right now, 1488, a pretty sizable chunk of Bitcoin. I've been digging in for the last couple weeks with, kind of the deep quants in the space, right? So people who are really looking to use the Bitcoin treasuries analytics to almost do sort of stock analysis or company valuations, and they're coming up with all these, interesting new metrics for valuing companies. So I guess I'm curious to get your thoughts. Do you consider Fold a Bitcoin treasury company? Because in some cases, I think a lot of these analysts, they're looking for what they consider sort of a pure play Bitcoin company, whereas they almost expect the Bitcoin to just be solely focused, or sorry, the company to be solely focused on acquiring Bitcoin. Like, how do you think about that dynamic, and do you consider Fold a Bitcoin treasury company?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. The market is definitely has all eyes on pure play Bitcoin treasury companies, but for Fold, we haven't changed. We're a Bitcoin operating company that stacks Bitcoin to our treasury, that then enables us to launch new Bitcoin financial services with better margins for us, lower costs for our customers, and Bitcoin native tools. And for us, we just see that as a mutually beneficial relationship where it makes deep sense for us to have both sides. There's a synergy there. And I think for us, as we continue to build out the operating company, we did our Q1 results back in May or so. Company is very high growth, growing 50% in revenues year over year, growing 300% in users. Every product line is profitable. And we are on a glide path to establishing an operating company that's dealing directly in Bitcoin native finance that will allow us to stack Bitcoin without dilution. And I think that's really the kind of will become the gold standard as we get out of this kind of hype phase. And it's already kind of happening. You're starting to see a lot of differentiation. The the pure plays are saying they're going to be acquiring companies. What happens in bear markets, what happens when MNAV goes flat or negative. That's not really a worry for us. We got a business that's absolutely chugging along, great momentum. And ultimately, where does that bring us? It brings us to acquiring Bitcoin without dilution. I think that's where investors want to be. Although I have to say, we've increased our Bitcoin holdings by 50% since becoming a public company.
Hmm.
And we just over the last, I think it was last month, we announced a $250 million credit facility to accumulate more Bitcoin. Our market cap is about 250 million. So we're very serious about playing both of these sides, and we're confident the market's starting to get smarter on how to think about what a Bitcoin treasury company actually is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, a lot of these metrics feel very new, right? I think I've been, you can dig into the glossary on Bitcoin treasuries. You'll find a bunch of new ones. You mentioned a couple, so I'll just throw them out there. I guess you mentioned MNAV, and you mentioned, Bitcoin per share, right? Which is this idea that investors are sort of, should think about the returns of their holdings of, the equity for Fold, like in Bitcoin terms. Are there terms you like, terms you don't like? Which ones do you think are strong, and are there any that you think are, maybe a little bit misguided in the picture they paint?
Yeah, I think I think there's a few. I think there's a lot of let's go right at the king initially is MNAV. I think there's a lot of misconceptions on how to value MNAV, especially when you have confounding factors like operating companies that are in addition to the pure play treasury, and you see this um, friction when you're talking about companies that do have opcos, Semlers, MicroStrategies. What is the operating business worth? What is the actual company worth? Is that underlying operating business growing and on a path to be accretive to the company, or is it a drag? Is it a zombie company that's just been flipped, that has low growth or negative growth, that ultimately will be a drag on the treasury? And I think there's a lot of details that people don't bring into the nuance. And what has happened is you see a lot of this hype cycle about driving MNAVs up, and it's I think a very simplistic way of looking at it. But again, it's because this whole movement is new, and I think the market is getting smarter. They're understanding on how to parse through these things. But ultimately, I think Bitcoin per share is the highest signal. And yes, it's something that it gets harder to increase relatively as the more Bitcoin you have. But ultimately, I don't think that's the point. I think it's just about building Bitcoin density into your company that allows you to deliver more value to shareholders, more security for the company, and for us. We look at it as the foundation for new products and services that will just drive more growth, more revenue lines. So I'd say Bitcoin per share is a signal. I think a lot of people are looking at things like days to cover. We'll have about a week in the headlines and then drop off.
Mm.
And I think a lot of it is just because you're seeing a lot of these new entrants to this space try to create a metric that specifically speaks to them and what they believe their progress or how to look good for them. But for me, ultimately, it's like, do you have a growing business with strong momentum, and do you have a path to regularly and consistently through bull markets and bear markets, a path to accumulate Bitcoin? And I think ultimately that's what every company will be judged by, but we got to give ourselves another 5 years before that happens.
Yeah, it's still early. Also, anyone who wants to come up and ask questions will be after this kind of initial Q&A with me and Will here, kind of opening up to the floor. So feel free to raise your hand. We'll get some people kind of prepped up to do some Q&A. I just want to dig in there for a second. You talked about Bitcoin per share and that being harder to kind of grow as the company moves along. So you're suggesting, I guess, that this metric sort of favors companies that are new and up and coming. And as you sort of start to build your Bitcoin stash, you have to rely on things like debt and things like that. Is that what you mean there, where it's difficult, like for a company like MicroStrategy, to increase its Bitcoin per share, even though it has so much Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest part is to look at some of these companies that are announcing, their treasury strategy, and they have 50 Bitcoin. Well, go ahead and add another 50 Bitcoin, and it's you have some pretty incredible numbers to report. But Saylor is obviously not in a position to accumulate another 600,000 Bitcoin. Well, we'll see. He always actually can surprise
Yeah.
to the upside. So I should just not say that. But you get the point. There are certain metrics that are essentially built to and marketed by these companies to, I think, allow them to show a differentiation both at the stage that they're at, but also, some companies look good on some and others don't on others. And I think it's really about how they're marketing. And so we're going to see an absolute flurry of new metrics in which to look at these companies by. But at the end of the day, is it growing? And that is both from a perspective of, can they consistently have a track record of accumulating Bitcoin over a long period of time? And I'm talking about bull and bear cycles. So from my perspective, MicroStrategy is the only company that's been de-risked from that. You have no idea what happens when some of these companies kind of airdropped into becoming a Bitcoin treasury company, and what happens to conviction when the rest of the world is telling you you're wrong, and they can point at charts that you know kind of suggest you're wrong, at least for over a small period of time. You're going to see what happens with conviction. And what we saw with Saylor is that conviction ultimately is why I think they should demand a premium, because in the face of it all, he did not waver and only continued to accelerate. That's a test that just other companies haven't gone through yet. And we're just dealing with such a limited horizon of data at the moment. So it's interesting to see.
Yeah, I was calling it the passion of Michael Saylor. I
That's
went through that
it's perfect.
entire bear market where people really did bear down on him, and people forget about the Wall Street Journal headline magazine stories about strategies. I think there's one famous headline where it's the failed strategy. Now
Yes.
he's taking a bit of a victory lap there. Laptops, we see up there with the emojis. Thanks for requesting. Reminder to everybody else, if you want to get up here and ask some questions to one of the leading Bitcoin company CEOs here, just request and we'll get you in that queue. Going to do a few more questions from me with Will. So, Will, you're talking a little about metrics. I guess maybe I'll hit you with just a differentiation piece of this, where as you're thinking about Fold and what you guys can really offer, and looking at the field of companies that are competing here, how do you differentiate? What are you thinking about? And obviously, it's not the metrics, right? You're probably looking for something else. So how do you think through differentiation as you think about building the company?
Well, I think where we are differentiated is really basically at the beginning of what you said. There are essentially pure play Bitcoin treasuries, which are essentially a public vehicle, a bag that then you just put Bitcoin in, and you just try to put as much Bitcoin in it as possible in the most accretive way. And that's certainly a game. And that game entirely relies on having access to the most capital available. A lot of these smaller companies are going to start to get larger, and then they're going to be essentially competing for some of the same capital pools. Luckily, those pools are big, but right now they're kind of dominated by a one or two of the companies, and competition is going to increase, and that access to that capital will as well. And so for Fold, um, we have the benefit of that because we're a public company. But what we feel like, and always, is that Bitcoin idea of low time preference, of that we are creating a Bitcoin financial services company that gives us a unique uh, angle on everyone else, and that's our platform sits in the flow of billions of dollars of Bitcoin being passed back and forth through traditional financial system to users to through all of our financial tools, and Fold is generating Bitcoin native revenues just by facilitating this activity. And as more people begin to look to Bitcoin, which Bitcoin is the fastest growing financial network on the planet, it's also the fastest appreciating asset on the planet. Fold sits and gets access to both of those growth areas of Bitcoin. And what that ultimately allows us to do is, as the Bitcoin network continues to grow and Fold continues to solidify our position as a top financial services platform or gateway to Bitcoin, we get to benefit from being in that flow by adding more Bitcoin to our treasury without dilution at all. So we can tap those capital markets when needed. And you'll see that we've done that. We brought on another 500 Bitcoin this year, where we have a $250 million credit facility lined up. So we're tapping those capital markets. But at the end of the day, the entire team that we have here at Fold is focused on building that Bitcoin accumulation engine that activates in the mid and long term, that accumulates Bitcoin every day without any dilution. And that is where you're going to see an edge show up for us, that we believe also, with the fact of how fast Bitcoin network is growing, that has a true chance of actually outpacing Bitcoin's outperforming Bitcoin in the mid to long term.
Interesting. Well, we've got a couple people up as speakers. Eddie, laptops. We'll get to you in a second. I've got one more before we really open it up. Just a reminder: keep those requests coming if you want to ask questions. We've got Will Reeves here from Fold. He's building a massive Bitcoin treasury, just outside the top 30 right now. It sounds like we're going to be in the top 30 soon. Will, for MicroStrategy, obviously we've talked about strategy a few times in this conversation. There's this idea that MicroStrategy has the playbook, right? So I'm curious, as you look at what strategy's done this year with the different products like Stride, Strife, Strike, all these sort of different products, that have essentially tapped, different markets for capital fundraising. Is your view that this is something that could be replicated? Is this something that really only, strategy has the ability to do for its unique position, or is this just a mature Bitcoin company at scale should be able to kind of operate similarly? I'm just curious for your view on this yield curve that he's building.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, I think a good way of looking at strategy is, very similar to the proliferation and the growth of kind of the oil refinery ecosystem. And um, they are just creating products that these are not just simple capital transactions. These are actual products that they can offer various of customers who happen to have trillions of dollars of capital, and they're working their way up the stack. They started with a very strong retail base. They tapped into institutions. These prefs and our other products are speaking to very specific capital allocators, and they have made their specialty um, being an innovator here, creating things that are completely novel in terms of public equity markets. And so while everyone is seeing the playbook played, it does not mean that everyone has access to these. And there's two kind of ways to think about that. Number one, we're seeing a flood of these new Bitcoin treasury companies come to market. But what needs to be understood is that just because you're a public company does not mean you have access to the same tools that Saylor does. And so a good example of this is if you have if you don't have enough float or liquidity in the stock, if you don't have an options market, um, if you haven't developed the connections to the core capital allocators in this space, you're not going to be able to get the same effect, even though you know what strategy is doing. You're not going to be able to replicate. Another good example is, all these new companies coming to market, they can't even have an ATM. An ATM is not available to new public companies hitting the market until they're seasoned for 12 months. So there are some, even the most core basic tool that strategy has deployed is actually just not part of the tool set of many of these companies and won't be for a long time. And so what Saylor is doing is he is just innovating out on the edge, way ahead of this other wave. And this is why I think he's very confident in this, is because he understands the moat. He understands the timing moat that he has. Also, um, he understands the execution mode. It's not simple. I think that's why a lot of people respect Metaplanet, is because they're actually have proven over a track record, not as long as MicroStrategy, but as long as some other treasury companies out there. But they are just far more innovative in speaking to the specific products that work for them, their stage, and their market. That I think draws a lot of attention to them. And I think it's definitely something that they have deserved. But the great part about Michael Saylor is he can be completely transparent about what he's doing, and it's going to be exceptionally hard for people to catch him, not only for structural reasons baked into their position, their stock, but also for execution. And I think just like any other company trying to out innovate, it's very similar to, you see, Elon Musk open sourcing their electrical vehicle systems, or others that just have a position in the market where even with an open source, they still get to lead, and they benefit from new people entering more than they would having not open sourced that. So I think again, it's history repeating itself. And I wish everyone luck, but Saylor is just so far out in front.
Yeah, interesting graphic from Bloomberg out today. They did I think the top IPOs of the year, and I think 4 or 5 of them were strategy, strategy
Yep.
related issuance. And that's just IPOs, like initial public offerings from any company of any size, right? So pretty interesting stuff. Okay, well, we've got some questions. We're gonna get some other people in the mix here. Again, if you want to request to come up, please do so. We've got 3 people on stage, laptops. You were here first. Your question for Will.
Sweet. Thanks for having me up, Will. Good to talk to you. I ask this every once in a while. It's been a while since I've asked it. So apologies if you've already addressed this recently in another space. But um, is there a roadmap for when we're going to be able to do Lightning deposits and withdrawals as opposed to on-chain deposits and withdrawals within the Fold app?
Yeah, that is a great question, and I think one that has been with us for a while. Fold was an early innovator in Lightning. We actually created one of the largest kind of commerce oriented uses of the Lightning Network. We did something like a fun joke project called Lightning Pizza that allowed you to order Domino's pizza and get it delivered via the Lightning Network. Today, you can buy things on Fold with the Lightning Network. But so far, Lightning deposits hasn't been something that has made it to the top of our roadmap. But I can say the ecosystem has matured in such incredible ways that the ability for us to do that with some of our partners makes it much closer on the timeline in towards of rolling out. I can't give any specific updates, but I'll say we've brought together a team over the last 8 months that comes from some of the best fintech uh, uh, companies out there and some of the best Bitcoin companies out there that have great track records of building into Lightning. And so we have the talent, we have the ecosystem is matured. So it's something that's absolutely not far off. And I'd have to say, when you start seeing things like legislation being proposed about, de minimis exemptions on Bitcoin transactions, those types of things certainly make us feel like we need to accelerate. So I imagine it's not too far off.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Exciting stuff. Yeah, a lot to build everywhere in the space. I think Eddie was next. Eddie, retail analyst in crypto media. How are you doing?
Hey, thank you for having me up. Appreciate you guys having this space. This is great website to go check out. The top Bitcoin treasuries. If you guys are interested, I probably type in bitcointreasuries.net once a day at least, about as often as I spin that wheel on the Fold app. So, but my question is for Will. I guess, how do you like view the quarter over quarter distortion of the Bitcoin price on your earnings? And how should like investors think about it too? Because like first quarter ended like 82K, second quarter 111K. Just big asymmetric opportunities right there. And how do you think we should be processing that?
Yeah, I think again, I think the market is waking up to this. I think a kind of a bad precedent was set pretty early with Bitcoin treasury companies or companies with big treasuries, where they kind of wanted that distortion because it was specifically coming out of miners that obviously have huge capital requirements, and that distortion, especially when Bitcoin is kind of in an upswing and even actually in a downswing, can kind of give you some cover. And I think the market is woken up to that. They understand. And so Fold specifically, we report, just an adjusted EBITDA to just pull that out, make it really clear, because we don't, I think anyone who's been holding Bitcoin for as long as we have and others are probably pretty happy about their Q2 results coming through. And we think that's an important piece of it that demonstrates the growth of your treasury, but also it shouldn't get in the way of understanding how the business is functioning. And so for us, we've always taken, hey, let's go full, transparency first. You can get the top line that will have that distortion, but also let's give investors a really easy way of understanding an adjusted look that strips that out.
Maybe I just have to ask for people whose this is over their head. Eddie, your question is: this is really just about the Bitcoin price rising, just distort? Can you explain generally, like what you're asking there?
Well, I feel like it's something that the retail analyst or OG crypto investor can kind of spot, but the traditional analyst is going to look that over where they see this treasury is worth significantly less like when you bought it, right? So it's going to process as a loss as a quarter over quarter. But if Fold is not operating to be a quarter over quarter type of company, it's probably year over year, looking at a roadmap 5-10 years down the road. So I think that is a small asymmetric opportunity that a lot of retail investors may catch or may not catch, but it'll look different obviously on these earnings reports. But I'm confident that this next earnings is going to look obviously really great with Bitcoin's price where it's at. And I saw Will did post like a poll. Should he do it on Spaces? Should they do a video? So that also gives me a little extra momentum. I don't know where we ended up settling at, but hopefully X Spaces would be awesome for earnings.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. We're looking to, we're a consumer company. We have hundreds of thousands of people who found Bitcoin through us or get to use Bitcoin because of us. And now we're a public company and there's a whole nother way to engage with us. And so for us, it is something that, figuring out where this message should be promoted. I think this is why I was pretty interested once Pete and NVK were being like, "Hey, Bitcoin Treasuries has become the front page of this movement. This should be a platform to tell these stories."
Well, I think we've got Eddie back here, and at least we were chatting with Eddie, so maybe we can pick that back up as people file in.
Yeah, thanks for having me back up. Yeah, I mean, Will was cooking right there when the space went down, but we'll just blame it on Elon. Elon's SpaceX. We always have issues with the spaces, so it's easy just to go ahead and
He's got
force
his
the blame
mind
there.
on other things, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think we were talking about the quarter over quarter Bitcoin distortion price. So, it's like in the long term, we know where Bitcoin's going, but in a 3 month period, Bitcoin could end at 80K and then in the next 3 months end at above 100K. And it's a complete shift in the paradigm of like how traditional stocks are usually viewed. It's usually up only, any pullback, any weird stuff going on quarter over quarter is a red flag. But for a Bitcoin treasury company, it ends up being uh, volatility is opportunity type of thing. So I think that's where we were
How is
going.
that different though than just? I mean, most companies have exposure to different asset classes, right? That are going up and down, like different. They own like different indexes, and I imagine some own gold. I would imagine, right? Like, isn't there analogs for that?
You,
I
you know,
think
oh, go ahead, Will.
Yeah, no, I think to Eddie's point, we have never, the Bitcoin's volatility to some extent is kind of unmatched, and so you will get these massive drawdowns or spikes. We could have ended, a given quarter could have ended in the last 2 days having a 20, 30, 20% drawdown, and now all these companies have a very different earnings that's coming out all of a sudden because of that drawdown. Now, anyone who's actually following it and has a long-term view of their Bitcoin holdings, that doesn't phase anybody at all. But it certainly will scare the algorithms and uninformed traders.
Oh, I see. The idea is you're basically just judged by this one random snapshot, and so if it's just like there's a crash that day for whatever reason, that's your quarterly result that you have to live
Correct.
with. Okay, yeah,
And
that breaks it down.
this is and it's one that, because the fair value of your Bitcoin is being recorded in such a way, it also it gets put in with all the other operating metrics that are cash flows, or that happens in the company. This is why miners, or many miners I should say, never broke it out, because once they were in a kind of an up only Bitcoin phase, it kind of hid some of the sins of the operating model a little bit. And so again, it just can be used, that volatility can be used strategically in many, many ways. And so I think for us, it's just like that's getting known. The more and more people are understanding this trade, and what the time frame is. And yes, there are going to be traders who take advantage of those short dips that they know will have an effect on the earnings. But at the end of the day, many are looking out years and where they're going. And I think that was never actually, there was a great space with like Josh Mandel and Rai Quant the other day, and it's just, one is looking at it from a pure quarter by quarter trader perspective, and the other is kind of a long term Bitcoiner. And there's opportunities for both once public companies start getting heavy bags of Bitcoin.
Yeah, maybe this is unrelated or related, but I guess I'll ask anyway. I was looking at ProCap. Anthony Pompliano's firm had an announcement today, but it was something to do with the amount of shares that people get in the company based on the Bitcoin price the day they invest, or something like that. It was almost like trying to sync up like the daily Bitcoin price windows with just Wall Street reporting requirements. Is that kind of a similar thing that we're talking about here?
I don't quite know. I'm going to look what this is, but what's happening right now is you have a lot of these SPACs who you know, haven't de-SPACed yet. And so, people are looking at how much Bitcoin they hold, and they're looking at how many outstanding shares of that specific company, and then they come up with some type of Bitcoin per share metric, or some type of way of understanding it's MNAV essentially. But what they're often missing is that outstanding shares does not include anything of the shares that will be added to that company post DSPAC, and you will, the investors in the shell today will ultimately hold a very small percentage of the total company post DSPAC, which changes all of the math. And this is where there's so much arbitrage opportunity, it's for better or for worse, unfortunately, where a lot of these things aren't just the retail is not quite totally grokked at all yet, and it comes with consequences. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how the next 6 months play out as some of these big SPAC plays come to market. And there was a lot of excitement ahead, and then there's gonna be a reckoning, but we'll come out the other side, and things will start to settle. But it just goes to show there's so much beyond how much Bitcoin you have at play. There's total outstanding shares. There's where it is in terms of how long it's been a public company. What tools do they have at their exposure? All of this is going to help people understand the value and the opportunity. But it's really right now something that is pretty advanced inside baseball, and a lot of people don't have it, and the conversations aren't often about it.
Well, we'll get them going in the spaces and time. Conscious of time here, we've got a couple of people who wanted to ask questions. Reminder: if you want to ask questions, we're talking to one of the great CEOs in the Bitcoin space right now, so feel free to just hit that request button, come up to the stage. Brittany's been waiting for a while. Brittany, how are you doing? Welcome to the spaces, and interested in your question.
Thank you so much for hosting. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Well, so great to be speaking with you. I do have two questions. First question, will we be seeing Fold have any presence at the Bitcoin Treasuries Conference September 17th in New York?
So our GC and head of legal and compliance, Haley Lennon, I believe, is going to be a host at the Bitcoin Treasury Conference. Unfortunately, I will be called to a different part of the world then, so we're kind of dividing and conquering. But love everything that they're doing over there, and I think I'd absolutely say go up and say hi to say hi to Haley.
Absolutely, we'll definitely be tapping in with Haley. My second question, the credit card rollout, I wonder how that's going. Will app users be preferred, or are you going by the wait list? What can we see from that?
So obviously we updated the market. There was unfortunately we had one of our critical partners was acquired by a very large company, and they proceeded to shut down the offering. And so right at the finish line, we had to pivot. But I'll say I think a lot more information is going to come up over earnings and over the next quarter. That is, I think, going to show that the program is absolutely is imminent and definitely on track. And number, I think, best of all, is going to be better for it. And so the way we're going to bring people on, we'll be taking a mix of both the wait list. We've a lot of people want a lot of Bitcoin from climbing that wait list, so we're going to respect that. And then also our long-term users will also get priority access.
Thank you so much for answering. Do we have any sneak peeks of any products that will be shipping soon, or anything that you can tell us about that?
With earnings right around the corner, we got to save a lot of that for then. Unfortunately, it's not as fun being a public company anymore as it was being a private company where we get to talk, about literally whatever. So I'm learning to restrain myself, and I'm going to make my lawyers happy for doing so in this moment.
Okay, that was a test. Just kidding.
Different world. Thanks, Brittany, for the questions. I think we've got one more person, John, who's maybe on the private side of kind of the Bitcoin company equation. John, how are you doing?
Oh, well, I'm only on like floor 45 with a 40-pound vest on, so hopefully I don't sound too out of breath. But well, what's up, dude? It's good seeing you in Vegas. I guess like
Absolutely, John.
the question I'd have for you would be the same question I'd probably ask you privately, like, framework, stacking sats. I'm not sure if we told you about it or how much you know, but I'm working on going public. Would love any broad advice from a longtime friend and Bitcoiner. And I'm gonna go on mute so my breath isn't overtaking your answer.
So I've been able to follow at the outset of stacking sats. I'm very excited about it because I think, to me, it points to what I believe the future of Bitcoin treasury companies are. We're definitely going to be we're definitely going to see the market, come up with a few behemoths that really operationalize and the capital transactions and capital markets plays, aggressively following and differentiating against Saylor's strategy. It's unclear how many of them there actually can be in any given market. So what we're going to see is an absolute explosion of Bitcoin treasury companies that have great growing businesses like yours, John, and that are stacking sats behind the scenes. And I think that one of the best examples of this is very quietly in the background, Figma filed for an IPO. Not one element of their marketing is around, hey, they hold 70 million plus of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Might be more than that, I forget. They just hold it because it makes sense. They believe in the asset. They believe it's a superior store of value. And you're going to see a lot more companies like that. I think stacking sats is a great example of that new wave. Now, going public is a thing that is going to, require, an investment in a major investment on a couple fronts, both your time and focus, your ownership of a company and your shareholders' ownership, and then obviously cost. And so I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. You're seeing a lot of companies today. There's reverse mergers, there's SPACs, there's traditional IPOs, and all of them come with certain drawbacks and some benefits. And so it's really personal on which path is right for you. And I think one of the ways to look at it is something the way that we looked at it is Fold has been kind of tried through the kind of crucible of Bitcoin bear and bull markets. We have gone and operated at the depth of bear markets for years on end, grown through them. We've operated in the euphoria of bull markets. But we do know that we are, to some extent, ruled by these cycles. And going public is a process that requires kind of a longer timeline. And so you also want to make sure that you're able to shoot the gap into the markets at the right time. And again, that just, I think, goes into the calculus of what the right path is for you. Typically a SPAC or a reverse merger are going to be help you manage the timeline a little bit easier, but they come with other drawbacks. And so I think it's super, super personal. And John, I'm obviously always here and ready to speak more privately about your specific situation on where you could go.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Super helpful. I mean, a lot of what you just mentioned, a lot of the things that we're considering, the reality is the focus for us, and obviously I want to stay focused on Fold here as like one of the most old school, probably Fold holders. I still have one of the plastic cards to put that in perspective, but I think for us, we're just so focused on keeping the operating company healthy and looking for clever ways for us to acquire other revenue without diverting cash, capital, and or encumbering the balance sheet. And we feel like we're in the right industry to do so. And there's a ton of targets for us, but it is tricky in trying to balance the sustainability of the operating company, which I think is essential. And I think is one of the sort of pitfalls that I think a lot of people are raising their noses at. Like, hey, how do all these things exist without real operations or real sustainability? I think David's made mention, he wants to go out and build Bitcoin Hathaway. I've seen Simon make announcements around issuing equity to acquire operating companies. So I do think the leading players sort of see the writing on the wall. And I think there's been somewhat almost like a memory loss that like MicroStrategy actually had 50, $100 million worth of EBITDA, admittedly dying on the vine, but, was sweeping cash flows and ultimately had a profitable operation sort of going in to their Bitcoin strategy. And I think as I look at what Fold is doing, I look at what we're doing, what Semler's doing, obviously you guys are already public, Semler's already public, but to me, these seem to be the most sustainable sort of pathways to coming out on the other side, especially if you can have, in my mind, things that are not so correlated to Bitcoin. And that's one of the reasons that I like, even though you guys still are correlated to Bitcoin, there's still a lot of services and things that sort of you offer that aren't necessarily. So I still find that super attractive, and I'm sure you guys are going to crush. So I'm going to be here rooting along and following along. And I appreciate the offer.
Thank you, John. And I think you just mentioned something that I think needs to be reiterated. There is no MicroStrategy playbook without a MicroStrategy operating company at the beginning. Like that was an engine that allowed them to get it up and running. And so there's a little bit of some of these companies without an operating angle that are kind of skipping one of these steps. Now, it's clearly working in terms of accumulating today. What totally remains to be seen is, do they have the leadership to lead through conviction of a multi-year bear market or violent downturns? Or what happens when the competition for these capital pools becomes so high, concentrated on a few, and then you're left there not able to accumulate Bitcoin at the rate that you want, plus kind of exposed without an operating company. So, there's a reason. The signal you should look at is all of these companies starting to talk about what an operating company could be in the future for them. And the good part is about the companies like Fold, Semler, and Stacking Sats here is that it's far easier to buy Bitcoin than it is to run a successful operating company. And so anyone trying to pivot into becoming an operating company has far more execution risk than one that already exists today and is attached to a treasury. So all of this stuff is just it's we have a very limited time horizon in which we're viewing all of this, and I'm looking forward to the nuance, but also the track records start to emerge, because we're going to see it over the next 12 to 24 months. We're going to see these differences really start to appear.
Yeah, I agree. I agree totally. I think everything you guys are doing is really in line with our thesis. And I think, Saylor brought this up the other day in an interview with Burnett over at Semler. He's saying step one, make sure the operating company is healthy, make sure it's not hemorrhaging cash. And I was like, step one, 90% of the tickers out here skip step one. That doesn't mean it won't work. It just means you have to solve for that problem. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that we're not seeing a lot of building happening. I think you're right. It's much harder to build an actual company than it is to raise money and buy Bitcoin. And so, I think that's probably why we don't see as many companies like mine or yours. And I'm excited, man. I'm excited to see what you guys keep doing. So let me not hijack this any further. Pete, thanks for
Well,
letting me
quick,
up. And Will, good
John,
catching
thanks
up,
for
bro.
hopping on, winding down on time here. Just a quick reminder, BitcoinTreasuries.net. We do list private companies. Stacking Sats is on there with their Bitcoin balance if you want to go check that out. Got 4 minutes left here. We've got, looks like one speaker who's pretty eager. Booyah Poker, you got any questions for Will here, our CEO Roundtable?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes, I think so.
Yep.
I had a great idea. Now, say if you put like the tiniest dividend on the actual stock, right? But then you did stock buybacks. Now it was almost like a burn mechanism. Like say you did a transparent schedule. So say you did like a buyback, right? And then you paid the dividends with the buyback. It's almost like a decentralized like burn, like that's just going to go up forever, almost like Bitcoin in a way that's like not inflationary. Now, Will, if you're in here now, I think that would be very attractive to investors because it'll be like another capitual flywheel intertwining with the flywheel of Bitcoin on top of your treasury, on top of the flywheel based on chain. I mean, that could send it. That could really send it.
I think you're pointing to something that, again, we're saying we're going to see a lot of these stories start to develop and emerge, and you're pointing to one of the big ones. There's two aspects of this equation of Bitcoin per share. There's the numerator denominator. We only are talking really about
Well,
how much Bitcoin, but
yeah,
there's gonna
that's another like another flywheel that comes into the cog piece of all these flywheels coming together. But now I don't know if it's possible or what. But I was just sitting there thinking, like, if you had the tiniest dividend and then also you did stock buybacks on scheduling, now this opens up a lot of investors to be very creative, because I've been using Fold on before it was the card, before it was all that stuff for a bit, and then it turned into the card, and now it's turning into the credit card. And this, if we could, if I mean, that's just very interesting to think about. Like the tiniest dividend could open up so much more, and then if you did that intertwined with stock buyback, I just see so much of a future
Yeah, I think
if those things intertwined. Is
agreed.
all.
I think
And
you're.
while with him here, he's a company owner that actually listens and is like engaged on Twitter. And I just wanted to bring that up. I think those are things that could all be intertwined and not just be one flywheel. These are like three flywheels coming together like gears. And it was just something I was thinking about. So thank you as well.
Yeah, you're gonna see that dynamic once MNAVs compress. Once you start to see a couple go negative, the clear obvious thing to increase Bitcoin per share is through buybacks, is to reduce the amount of outstanding shares out there, and it's very counterintuitive because as a Bitcoiner, you want to put all of your available capital into buying more Bitcoin, but from the metrics out that are really dominating the space, it becomes very clear that to have the most efficient way of optimizing around Bitcoin per share, you got to look at where the market is, where your MNAV is, and be just as willing to sell to buy Bitcoin as it is to buy your stock back. And I think you saw David Bailey mention this at one point. I think he even mentioned selling Bitcoin for it. It got a lot of people
Not a popular
upset.
tweet, yeah.
Yes. So there, and this is what I'm saying. Like the story, we've only received 10% of it, and a lot of things are going to happen. And this subject is going to be there. What happens when leadership is stress tested on the most euphoric and kind of violent downswings? What happens when the capital markets more competition comes? What happens when you have a Figma out there that has throwing off massive cash flow that clearly already decides that Bitcoin is important to its treasury, and they start buying Bitcoin with that cash flow in a very non-dilutive way? There's so much that is yet to be written, and it's just going to be exciting, very interesting to look at now. But it's as we say, we're very early. We're still early.
Well, thanks for your time. Appreciate you educating everyone here, myself included. We'll be, of course, looking out for your upcoming earnings and all that's going on with Fold. Quick shout out to everyone here who's coming in. We'll be starting these spaces regularly every day. Tomorrow, we've got Pierre Richard from the Bitcoin Bond Company. He's going to come in, talk to us a little bit about what he's doing in the Bitcoin Treasury space, what he finds interesting. Certainly someone who is decades ahead of his time, usually. So you won't want to miss that one. Appreciate everyone joining, and kudos with Fold, and looking forward to getting my card as well out here in New York someday.
We'll make you happy, Pete. Not too long to wait. It was great to be here.
All right, take care, everybody.